Jake Morrison sat in the corner of Danny's diner, cutting his pancakes into small pieces. He wore dirty work clothes and steel-toed boots. Anyone looking at him would see a construction worker eating breakfast before work. They would not see a man who had spent 12 years in the Navy SEALs. Through the window, Jake watched 8-foot-tall aliens march down Main Street. The Korthak soldiers looked like giant lizards walking on 2 legs. They wore heavy armor that made loud clanking sounds on the pavement. Their weapons were bigger than anything Jake had ever seen. 3 months ago, these aliens had come from space. They had bombed every military base they could find. They had destroyed the Pentagon, the naval yards, and the Air Force bases. The Mao president had been killed in the first attack. The aliens thought humans would give up quickly. They were wrong. Jake finished his pancakes and left money on the table. He walked outside and nodded to the Korthak patrol. One of the aliens looked down at him. Jake smiled and waved like a friendly local. The alien made a noise and kept walking. The construction site was 2 blocks away. Jake climbed into his truck and drove slowly. He counted the alien vehicles he passed. 4 transport trucks, 2 patrol units, and 1 command vehicle. He made mental notes about their weapons and armor. At the construction site, Jake met with his crew. To everyone else, they were just working men building a new office complex. But Jake knew better. Bill Turner had been a Green Beret for 8 years. Carlos Mendez was former Army Rangers. Steve Johnson had worked for the CIA in Afghanistan. "Morning, boss," Bill said, adjusting his hard hat. "Ready for another day of work?" Jake nodded. "Let's get started." They worked with hammers and saws all morning. But they were also watching. The aliens had set up a checkpoint 3 blocks away. Every hour, a patrol walked by the construction site. The aliens never paid attention to the workers. This was exactly what Jake had planned. Across town, Linda Carter was serving coffee to alien officers. She wore a simple dress and apron. She smiled and asked if they wanted more sugar. The aliens thought she was just a waitress in a small cafe. Linda had spent 15 years in Army intelligence. She spoke 4 languages and had run operations in 6 countries. Now she was learning to speak the Korthak language by listening to their conversations. "More coffee?" she asked in broken Korthak words. The alien commander looked surprised. "You speak our language?" "Only a little," Linda said with a shy smile. "I want to learn more. Your people are so interesting." The commander seemed pleased. He began speaking slowly, teaching her simple words. He did not know that Linda was recording everything with a device hidden in her apron. In the suburbs, Bob Kelly was fixing cars in his garage. He had owned the auto shop for 5 years. The aliens brought their vehicles to him because he was the only mechanic who could work on their technology. Bob had been a Navy engineer for 20 years. He understood machines better than most people. While he fixed the alien vehicles, he was also studying them. He took pictures of the engine parts. He made notes about their fuel systems. He learned how to disable them without leaving any trace. "This transport needs new power cells," Bob told the alien driver. "I can fix it, but it will take 2 days." The alien nodded. 2 days is acceptable." Bob smiled. "I'll take good care of it." What the alien did not know was that Bob was installing a small device in the engine. The device would let humans track the vehicle anywhere it went. It could also shut down the engine with a radio signal. Downtown, Mary Rodriguez was working at the hospital. She was a nurse who took care of injured people. The aliens had kept the hospital open because they needed medical care too. Mary had been a combat medic in the Marines. She had saved lives in Iraq and Afghanistan. She knew how to treat wounds and how to help people survive terrible injuries. But she was also doing something else. She was collecting information about alien biology. She took blood samples when they were not looking. She studied their wounds to learn about their weaknesses. She discovered that they were allergic to certain common medicines. Nurse Rodriguez called an alien officer. "My arm is infected." Mary looked at the wound. "I can help you. This medicine will make it better." She gave the alien a shot that would heal the infection. But she also took notes about how the alien's body worked. This information would be very useful later. All across the city, people were living normal lives. They went to work, shopped for food, and took care of their families. The aliens saw a peaceful population that had accepted their rule. They did not see the truth. The garbage man was a former Air Force pilot. The librarian was ex-CIA. The school teacher had been a Navy intelligence officer. The taxi driver was a retired Army Ranger. The bank teller was former Special Forces. These people had spent years learning how to blend in. They had practiced living normal lives while doing secret work. They had learned to be invisible while staying ready for anything. The aliens had made a big mistake. They thought humans would fight like they did. They expected armies in uniforms. They looked for generals and soldiers in obvious places. Instead, they found a population that looked harmless, but was actually full of trained fighters. Commander Vexthul stood in his office in the former city hall. He looked at reports from his officers. The papers showed dozens of small attacks every day. Supply trucks were being destroyed. Communication towers were being damaged. Patrols were disappearing. "Sir," said his aide, "we cannot find the human military leaders. We have searched everywhere." "They must be hiding," Vexthul said. "Keep looking. Find their command structure." The aide nodded. "What about the civilian population? Should we question them?" "Civilians are not important," Vexthul replied. "They are not trained fighters. They cannot threaten us." This was the biggest mistake the aliens could make. That evening, Jake Morrison met with his team in the basement of an old church. 20 people sat in a circle. They looked like ordinary citizens: a waitress, a mechanic, a nurse, a teacher, a shopkeeper. "The aliens are getting frustrated," Jake said. "They cannot understand why we are so hard to find." "Good," said Linda Carter. "I have been learning their language. They are planning something big next week." Bob Kelly opened a notebook. "I have been studying their vehicles. I know how to stop them all at once." Mary Rodriguez pulled out a medical bag. "I have learned about their biology. I know how to make them sick without killing them." Jake looked around the room. "Everyone here has spent years learning to blend in. We have trained for this our whole careers. The aliens think we are just normal people. That is our biggest advantage." The plan was simple. Keep looking normal. Keep acting like regular civilians. Keep gathering information and striking at the right moments. The aliens would never suspect that their greatest enemies were the people they saw every day. The waitress who served their coffee, the mechanic who fixed their trucks, the nurse who treated their wounds, the construction worker who waved at their patrols. The Korthak Empire had conquered 17 worlds. They had never faced an enemy like this. They had never fought people who could hide in plain sight while planning their destruction. Jake Morrison finished the meeting and walked home through the quiet streets. He passed an alien patrol and nodded politely. They ignored him completely. This was exactly what he wanted. The war was just beginning, and the aliens had no idea what they were really fighting. Elena Vasquez walked through the hospital doors wearing her white nurse uniform. The alien guards at the entrance barely looked at her. She had been working here for 3 months, and they knew her face. To them, she was just another human who helped sick people get better. Elena had been an Air Force pararescue specialist for 8 years. She had jumped out of helicopters into war zones to save wounded soldiers. She could perform surgery under enemy fire and carry injured men twice her size to safety. But the aliens only saw a quiet nurse who smiled and did her job. The medical center had become the main treatment facility for injured Korthak soldiers. Elena worked in the emergency room where the worst cases came in. She cleaned wounds, gave medicines, and helped the alien doctors save lives. But she was also doing something else entirely. Every time an alien patient came in, Elena took careful notes. She studied their blood, their bone structure, and how their bodies healed. She discovered that the Korthak had excellent hearing but poor eyesight in dim light. She learned that they were much stronger than humans but moved slowly when injured. Most importantly, she found out that they had a major weakness. The aliens could not handle certain frequencies of sound. High-pitched noises made them dizzy and confused. Elena began collecting this information in a secret file hidden in her locker. Across town, Ben Wright was opening his hardware store for another day of business. The morning rush brought several alien customers who needed supplies for their construction projects. Ben smiled and helped them find what they needed. The aliens liked his store because Ben always had everything in stock. He was helpful and friendly. He spoke slowly so they could understand his English. They trusted him completely. Ben had been a lieutenant colonel in Army intelligence for 15 years. He had run secret operations in 12 different countries. He knew how to gather information without anyone noticing. His hardware store was perfectly located. It sat on the corner of Main Street and Fifth Avenue, where he could see all the major roads in town. From his front window, Ben could watch alien patrols, count their vehicles, and track their movement patterns. In the back room of his store, Ben had set up a communication center. It looked like a storage area full of paint cans and tools. But hidden behind the supplies was radio equipment that could reach other cities hundreds of miles away. Every evening after closing, Ben would send coded messages to resistance groups across the country. He shared information about alien positions, weaknesses, and planned operations. The messages sounded like ordinary business communications about hardware supplies. Shipment of 20 hammers arriving Tuesday. Ben would radio to a contact in Chicago. But the real message was that 20 alien vehicles would be traveling through the area on Tuesday. Maria Santos was working late in the public library, organizing books, and helping the few people who still came to read. The aliens had allowed the library to stay open because they wanted to keep the human population calm and occupied. Maria had spent 12 years as a CIA operative in South America. She had overthrown governments and tracked down international criminals. She could speak 6 languages and had memorized the faces of every important person in 3 continents. Now she was using those skills to coordinate the largest intelligence operation in human history. The library had become the secret headquarters for information gathering across the entire region. People came in to return books, but they were really sharing intelligence about alien activities. The old woman who checked out romance novels was actually a retired Air Force colonel reporting on alien air patrols. The teenage boy who read science fiction was the son of a former Navy SEAL who passed messages between resistance cells. Maria had created a system using library book codes. Each book had a number, and certain combinations of numbers meant different things. A request for books numbered 245, 67, and 891 meant that aliens were planning a major operation in Sector 7. The system was brilliant because it looked completely normal. People checking out books was the most innocent activity imaginable. The aliens never suspected that the quiet librarian was running a spy network that covered half the state. Frank Collins was driving his ambulance through the city streets, responding to emergency calls. He had been a paramedic for 5 years, ever since he retired from Delta Force. The aliens allowed emergency medical services to continue because they needed medical help too. Frank had spent 20 years in the most elite military unit in the world. He had fought in secret wars that the public never heard about. He could kill a man with his bare hands or save a life with the same hands. His ambulance was the perfect cover for moving around the city without suspicion. Frank could go anywhere, at any time, and the aliens would wave him through their checkpoints. They never searched his vehicle because it was clearly marked as medical equipment. But Frank was doing much more than saving lives. He was moving weapons, delivering messages, and transporting people who needed to disappear. The back of his ambulance had secret compartments that could hide small weapons or important documents. When Frank picked up an injured person, he would often find that they had information about alien activities. A construction worker who had been hurt in an accident might whisper details about alien building projects. A woman who had fallen downstairs might share gossip she had overheard from alien officers. Frank collected all this information and passed it along to the resistance network. He also used his medical knowledge to help treat wounded fighters who could not go to regular hospitals. The beauty of the human resistance was that it was completely invisible. The aliens searched for military bases, weapon factories, and command centers. They looked for the kind of obvious targets that existed on other worlds they had conquered. But Earth was different. The real military strength was scattered throughout the civilian population. It was hidden in plain sight, disguised as ordinary people doing ordinary jobs. Commander Vexthal was becoming more frustrated every day. His forces controlled every important building in the city. They had checkpoints on every major road. They monitored all communications and watched the human population carefully. Yet the attacks continued. Every day brought new problems. Supply. Convoys were ambushed by enemies who seemed to appear from nowhere. Communication equipment was sabotaged by people who understood exactly how to cause maximum damage. Patrols went missing in areas that seemed completely safe. The human resistance is more organized than we expected, reported his intelligence officer. They appear to have extensive knowledge of military tactics. Impossible, Vexthal replied. We destroyed their military infrastructure in the first week. Their army, navy, and air force no longer exist. Then who is attacking us? Vexthal studied the reports on his desk. The attack showed professional planning and execution. The people carrying them out clearly had military training. But where were they hiding? Increase patrols in residential areas, he ordered. Search for hidden military installations. There must be secret bases we have not found. His officers nodded and left to carry out the orders. They would search empty buildings, abandoned warehouses, and remote locations. They would find nothing, because they were looking in the wrong places. The real enemy was serving them coffee in the morning. The real enemy was fixing their vehicles. The real enemy was treating their wounded. The real enemy was selling them supplies and smiling while they did it. That evening, Elena Vasquez met with a small group in the basement of St. Mary's Church. They sat in a circle and spoke in whispers. To anyone watching, it would look like a prayer meeting or support group. The aliens are planning something big, Elena said. I overheard their doctors talking about preparing for major casualties. Ben Wright nodded. My contacts in other cities are reporting increased alien activity. They are moving large numbers of troops. Maria Santos opened a notebook. The pattern suggests they are preparing for a major offensive against civilian targets. They think that will break our resistance. Frank Collins leaned forward. They still do not understand what they are fighting. They think we are just ordinary people who got lucky with a few successful attacks. Elena smiled grimly. Let them keep thinking that. The longer they underestimate us, the better our chances. These 4 people represented decades of military and intelligence experience. Elena had saved lives in combat zones. Ben had planned operations that changed the course of wars. Maria had toppled governments. Frank had fought battles that would never appear in history books. But to the aliens, they were just a nurse, a shopkeeper, a librarian, and a paramedic. The resistance was growing stronger every day. More people were joining the network. Information was flowing faster. Attacks were becoming more coordinated and effective. And the aliens still had no idea what they were really fighting against. The Korthak Empire had made the same mistake on 17 other worlds. But it had never mattered before. Other species had traditional military structures that could be identified and destroyed. Other species separated their soldiers from their civilian populations. Humans were different. Their most dangerous warriors looked exactly like everyone else. They had spent their entire careers learning to blend in, to appear harmless while remaining deadly. Carol Peterson wiped down the counter of her coffee shop and smiled at the 2 Korthak officers sitting by the window. They came in every morning at 8:30 for their daily briefing meeting. They thought her small cafe was a safe place to discuss military plans. They had no idea that Carol had spent 23 years as a CIA station chief in Eastern Europe. She had run spy networks in Moscow, Prague, and Warsaw. She could read body language in 12 different species and spot a lie from across the room. More coffee? Carol asked in her cheerful voice. The alien commander nodded. Yes, please. This is excellent coffee. Thank you, Carol said, refilling their cups. I roast the beans myself. While she poured, Carol listened carefully to their conversation. The aliens were speaking in their own language, but Carol had been studying it for months. She understood about 60% of what they said. Today they were discussing a new security operation. They planned to search every building in the downtown area. They suspected that humans were hiding weapons and communication equipment somewhere, in the city center. Carol kept her face neutral, but inside she was already planning. This information needed to reach the resistance network immediately. The barista working behind the counter was actually Danny Price, a former NSA analyst who could break any code and track any electronic signal. The delivery boy bringing fresh pastries was Kevin Hart, who had spent 5 years with Army intelligence in Afghanistan. Even the regular customers were part of the network. The old man reading his newspaper by the door was retired FBI counterintelligence. The woman with the laptop was former Marine Corps reconnaissance. The teenager doing homework was the daughter of a Navy SEAL, trained from childhood to notice and remember important details. Carol's coffee shop had become the center of the largest intelligence operation in the city. Information flowed in from dozens of sources and was analyzed, processed, and distributed to resistance cells across the region. The aliens saw a simple neighborhood cafe where friendly humans served good coffee. They never imagined they were sitting in the middle of a spy network that would have impressed the best intelligence agencies on Earth. Across town, Rick Thompson was driving his garbage truck through the downtown streets. He had been collecting trash on the same route for 3 years. The alien guards at every checkpoint knew his face and waved him through without inspection. Rick had been a master sergeant in Army Special Forces for 18 years. He had fought in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and 6 other countries that were still classified. He could speak Arabic, Farsi, and Russian fluently. He could build explosives from kitchen chemicals and navigate by the stars. But to the aliens, he was just a garbage man doing his job. Rick's truck route took him past every major alien installation in the city: the command center, the supply depot, the communication tower, and the vehicle maintenance facility. As he collected trash, Rick counted guards, noted weapon positions, and observed patrol schedules. His truck had been modified with hidden cameras that recorded everything he saw. The garbage bins contained communication equipment that could intercept alien radio signals. The truck itself was armored and could carry small weapons or explosives if needed. Most importantly, Rick's route gave him access to alien trash. Military units always threw away important information by accident. Rick found discarded reports, broken equipment, and even classified documents that aliens had carelessly disposed of. Every piece of garbage told a story. Food wrappers showed how many soldiers were stationed at each location. Equipment boxes revealed what kind of weapons they were using. Medical supplies indicated if they had wounded personnel. Rick collected all this intelligence and passed it to Carol at the coffee shop. Together, they built a complete picture of alien operations in the city. The resistance network was growing larger every day. People who had seemed like ordinary citizens were revealing their true backgrounds. The mailman was former Air Force intelligence. The bus driver was retired Navy Special Warfare. The bank manager was ex-CIA Operations Division. Each person brought unique skills and knowledge to the fight. The mailman could intercept alien communications. The bus driver knew every road and alley in the city. The bank manager understood how to track money and supplies. In Washington, D.C., the aliens had taken over the Capitol building as their primary command center. They thought it was the perfect symbol of their conquest. The building was impressive, secure, and showed the human population that alien rule was permanent. Commander Vex Thule had his office in what used to be the Senate chamber. He liked the formal atmosphere and the sense of authority it gave him. Every day he received reports from commanders across North America. The reports were not encouraging. Attacks were increasing in frequency and sophistication. The humans seemed to know exactly when and where to strike for maximum effect. Supply convoys were being destroyed with perfect timing. Communication facilities were being sabotaged by people who clearly understood the technology. "Sir," said his aide, "perhaps we should consider that the human resistance is more capable than we initially assessed." Bexthal looked up from his reports. "What do you mean?" "The attacks show professional military planning. The timing is too precise to be accidental. The targets are chosen for strategic value, not random destruction." "Impossible," Bexthal replied. "We destroyed their military in the first week of occupation. Their armies no longer exist. Then who is conducting these operations?" Bexthal had no answer. The evidence suggested organized military resistance, but he could find no trace of Military units. His forces had searched every possible hiding place. They had interrogated hundreds of civilians. They had monitored all communications, yet the attacks continued. What Vexthul did not know was that his cleaning crew included former members of the Defense Intelligence Agency. The maintenance workers were retired Special Operations Command personnel. The kitchen staff were ex-CIA operatives who spoke perfect Korthak and understood every word of his conversations. The aliens had placed their most important facility in a building surrounded by their deadliest enemies. Every day, highly trained intelligence professionals walked through their command center, collecting information and planning their destruction. The janitor who emptied Vexthul's trash was Tommy Walsh, who had spent 12 years with the Army's Intelligence Support Activity. The woman who cleaned his office was Susan Blake, former Navy intelligence specialist who had run operations in the Pacific Fleet. Tommy and Susan knew more about alien operations than most Korthak officers. They had access to classified documents, tactical plans, and strategic assessments. They photographed everything and passed the intelligence to resistance networks across the country. The aliens never suspected that their most sensitive information was being stolen by people they saw every day but never really noticed. In Chicago, similar operations were running in every alien facility. The post office workers were former NSA analysts. The telephone repair crews were retired Air Force intelligence. The food delivery drivers were ex-Special Forces operatives. The pattern was the same everywhere. Humans with decades of military and intelligence experience had seamlessly blended into civilian jobs. They appeared to be ordinary people going about their daily lives. In reality, they were conducting the most sophisticated espionage operation in human history. The aliens made the same mistake on every world they conquered. They assumed that military strength was obvious and easy to identify. They looked for uniforms, ranks, and formal command structures. Earth was different. Military expertise was distributed throughout the population. It was hidden behind friendly smiles and helpful attitudes. It was disguised as ordinary work and normal relationships. Carol Peterson finished serving the alien officers and watched them leave her coffee shop. They had just revealed the locations of 3 major weapons caches and the schedule for next week's security sweeps. Within an hour, this information would reach resistance cells across the city. The weapons caches would be emptied before the aliens realized they existed. The security sweeps would find nothing because everyone would know exactly when and where they were coming. Rick Thompson completed his garbage route and drove back to the depot. His truck's hidden cameras had recorded the alien command center from 6 different angles. The intercepted radio signals contained tactical frequencies and security codes. Tonight, resistance fighters would use this information to conduct 3 coordinated attacks that would cripple alien communications for 72 hours. The aliens were losing a war they did not even know they were fighting. Every day, their enemies gathered more intelligence, recruited more operatives, and planned more devastating attacks. And every day, those enemies served them coffee, collected their trash, and smiled politely while destroying their occupation from within. Commander Vexthul would soon learn that Earth's most dangerous soldiers did not wear uniforms or carry obvious weapons. They wore aprons and work clothes. They drove garbage trucks and served food. They cleaned offices and answered phones. They were everywhere and they were invisible. The Korthak Empire was about to discover why this made them impossible to defeat. The sirens began wailing at 3 a.m. Commander Vexthul was dragged from sleep by the urgent sound of the base alarm. He rushed to the command center, still wearing his sleeping robes. "Report," he demanded from the duty officer. "Sir, we have lost contact with Supply Depot 7. The communication tower at grid reference 245 has been destroyed. Transport Convoy Delta is reporting heavy casualties." Vexthul stared at the tactical display. Red warning lights blinked across the map showing damaged facilities and missing units. In one night, the humans had struck 12 different targets with perfect coordination. "How is this possible?" he asked. "These attacks happened simultaneously, across 300 kilometers. The humans would need military-grade communication and planning to coordinate something this complex." "Sir," the duty officer said quietly, "perhaps the human resistance is not what we thought it was." Vexthul did not want to hear this. For 6 months, he had assured his superiors that the human resistance consisted of scattered civilian groups with stolen weapons. He had reported that the situation was under control and that the occupation would be completed soon. But the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. Amy Clark was teaching her morning flight lesson when the news reached the airport. Her student was a young man learning to fly small aircraft, but Amy knew he was really a former Marine who was learning to pilot reconnaissance missions. Amy had spent 15 years with the Army's Special Operations Aviation Regiment. She had flown helicopters into the most dangerous combat zones on Earth. She could navigate by instruments in zero visibility and land on moving targets in hostile territory. Now she ran a small flight school at the municipal airport. To the aliens, she was just a civilian instructor teaching hobby flying. They had no idea that she was training pilots for a growing air force. The aliens are getting desperate, Amy told her student as they walked around the aircraft. Last night's attacks have them very worried. The student nodded. Good. When do we move to the next phase? Amy looked around carefully. They were alone on the tarmac, but she always checked for listening devices. Soon. We need to wait for the right moment. The right moment was coming sooner than anyone expected. That afternoon, Commander Vexthul made a decision that would change everything. He was tired of fighting an invisible enemy. He was frustrated by attacks that seemed to come from nowhere. He decided to use the one strategy that had worked on other worlds. Attention all units, he broadcast to his forces. Beginning immediately, we will implement collective punishment protocols. For every attack on our forces, we will arrest 100 civilians. For every destroyed facility, we will execute 10 hostages. The announcement was broadcast throughout the city on loudspeakers. Every human heard the alien commander's words. The resistance had 3 days to surrender, or innocent people would begin dying. Vexthul believed this would end the resistance quickly. On every other world, threats against civilians had broken the will to fight. Populations would turn against their own resistance movements rather than watch their families suffer. He had made the biggest mistake of his military career. Paul Martinez was stocking shelves at his grocery store when he heard the announcement. He had been a Marine gunnery sergeant for 22 years. He had fought in 4 wars and earned decorations for valor that were still classified. For 6 months, Paul had been carefully gathering intelligence and passing information to the resistance network. He had avoided direct action because his orders were to stay hidden and maintain his cover. The alien threat changed everything. Paul walked to his office and opened a safe hidden behind a filing cabinet. Inside were communication devices, weapons, and documents that had been waiting for this moment. He activated an emergency beacon that would alert every resistance cell in the region. The message was simple. Protocol 7 is now active. All restrictions are lifted. Full engagement authorized. Within hours, the nature of the resistance changed completely. People who had spent months pretending to be ordinary civilians began revealing their true capabilities. Jennifer Torres had been teaching 3rd grade for 5 years. The alien occupation had allowed schools to remain open because educated children were easier to control. Jennifer smiled and taught basic math and reading, while alien guards watched her classroom. But Jennifer had been an Army captain with 3 combat deployments. She had led infantry units in urban warfare and coordinated artillery strikes in mountain terrain. Her classroom was actually a training facility where children learned to recognize alien equipment and report on their movements. When Protocol 7 was activated, Jennifer's school became something entirely different. The building was converted into a logistics center for weapons distribution. The playground became a training ground for urban combat tactics. The cafeteria became a planning room for coordinated attacks. The aliens had allowed a former Army officer to run a facility in the heart of their occupied territory. Now they would pay for that mistake. Greg Adams had been coaching youth basketball at the community center for 3 years. The aliens liked the program because it kept young humans busy and tired. They thought sports would prevent the youth from causing trouble. Greg had been a Navy Chief Petty Officer with the SEALs for 16 years. He had trained special operations teams and planned amphibious assaults on enemy beaches. His basketball team was actually a squad of teenagers whose parents were all former military personnel. When the aliens threatened civilian executions, Greg's community center became a weapons training facility. The basketball court was perfect for practicing room-to-room combat. The weight room contained equipment for building explosives. The swimming pool was used for underwater demolition training. The young people Greg had been coaching were the children of Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Air Force Special Operations, and Marine Force Reconnaissance. They had been learning more than basketball. All across the city, similar transformations were taking place. The grocery store where Paul Martinez worked became a supply depot for military equipment. The elementary school became a command center. The community center became a training camp. The aliens had been occupying a city full of military installations disguised as civilian facilities. They had been walking past weapons caches hidden in ordinary buildings. They had been talking to enemy operatives who smiled and served them coffee every morning. Commander Vexthul realized something was wrong when his forces began reporting coordinated attacks of unprecedented scale and sophistication. Supply convoys were being destroyed by teams that moved with military precision. Communication facilities were being eliminated by experts who understood exactly how to cause maximum damage. "Sir," reported his intelligence officer, "we are facing organized military units. These are not civilian resistance groups." "Impossible," Vexthul insisted. "We destroyed their military. Where could organized units be hiding?" "Sir, what if they were never hiding? What if they were always here, and we just did not see them?" The thought was terrifying. If the humans had been conducting military operations from within the civilian population, then the entire occupation was compromised. Every facility, every checkpoint, every safe area could be under enemy observation. That night, Amy Clark received the signal she had been waiting for. She walked to her aircraft hangar and opened doors that had been locked for 6 months. Inside were not civilian training aircraft but military helicopters that had been hidden and maintained by her network. Amy and her pilots had been preparing for this moment since the invasion began. They had stockpiled fuel, weapons, and spare parts. They had planned missions and trained crews. They had been ready to become an air force again whenever the order came. The order had come. As darkness fell, helicopters lifted off from hidden landing sites across the region. Amy led a formation of 12 aircraft toward the alien command center. Her pilots were former military aviators who had been pretending to be civilian flight instructors. The aliens had allowed Earth's most experienced combat pilots to continue flying. They had permitted former special operations aviators to maintain aircraft and train new pilots. They had ignored the most dangerous air crews on the planet because those crews looked like harmless civilians. Commander Vexthul was reviewing damage reports when the first explosions shook his building. He looked out the window to see helicopters attacking his supply depot with precision strikes. The aircraft moved with tactical formation and professional coordination. "Those are military pilots," he said in shock. "Where did they get military aircraft?" His aide looked at the intelligence reports. "Sir, according to our records, those helicopters belong to civilian flight schools. The pilots are listed as civilian instructors." Vexthul stared at the burning supply depot. "Civilian instructors do not fly like that." For the first time since the invasion began, the alien commander understood that he had been fighting the wrong war against the wrong enemy. The humans had not been hiding their military capabilities. They had been displaying them openly, disguised as civilian activities. The grocery store manager was a former Marine officer. The flight instructor was a special operations pilot. The school teacher was an Army captain. The basketball coach was a Navy SEAL. Commander Vexthul was captured on a Tuesday morning while inspecting what he thought was a secure supply depot. The team that took him moved with precision that would have impressed the best military units in the galaxy. They appeared from nowhere, neutralized his guards without killing them, and vanished with their prisoner in less than 3 minutes. The leader of the capture team was a woman who introduced herself as Colonel Susan Mitchell. Vexthul had seen her many times before. She managed a small restaurant near the alien command center. She had served him lunch on several occasions and always smiled politely. He had never suspected that she was a career military officer with 25 years of experience in special operations. "You have been fighting the wrong war," Susan told the captured commander as they sat in a secure location. "You came here expecting to face our military. Instead, you have been fighting our veterans." Vexthul stared at her in confusion. "Veterans?" "Former soldiers," Susan explained. "People who served in our military and then returned to civilian life. On Earth, we have millions of them." The alien commander tried to understand what she was saying, "But they are civilians. They do not wear uniforms. They do not live in military bases." Susan smiled. "Exactly. That is what makes them so dangerous." Over the next several hours, Susan explained something that the Korthak Empire had never encountered before. Earth's military strength was not concentrated in obvious targets that could be destroyed in a single attack. Instead, it was distributed throughout the entire population. The waitress who had served alien officers was a former CIA operative. The mechanic who fixed their vehicles was an ex-Navy SEAL. The nurse who treated their wounded was a former combat medic. The teacher who educated their children was a retired Army captain. "Your biggest mistake," Susan continued, "was assuming that former soldiers become harmless when they take off their uniforms. On Earth, military training never goes away. The skills remain. The knowledge remains. The willingness to fight remains." Vexthul began to understand the scope of the disaster. How many of these veterans exist? In this city alone, about 12,000 people with serious military or intelligence experience. Across North America, nearly 2 million. Worldwide, almost 15 million former soldiers, intelligence officers, and special operations personnel. The numbers were staggering. The Korthak had invaded a planet where 3% of the adult population consisted of trained military professionals who looked exactly like ordinary civilians. "But they live normal lives," Vexthul protested. "They have jobs and families. They are not soldiers anymore." Susan shook her head. "You still do not understand. They never stopped being soldiers. They just learned to be soldiers while appearing to be something else." The interrogation continued for 3 days. Susan wanted the alien commander to fully comprehend the nature of his defeat before she released him back to his forces. She explained how Jake Morrison had been gathering intelligence while working construction, how Linda Carter had been learning the Korthak language while serving coffee, how Bob Kelly had been studying alien technology while fixing their vehicles. "Every person you trusted was watching you," Susan said. "Every civilian who smiled and helped you was gathering information about your weaknesses. Every friendly interaction was an intelligence operation. The Resistance had been conducting the most sophisticated espionage campaign in galactic history, and the aliens had never noticed because they had never seen anything like it before. On other worlds, soldiers looked like soldiers. Military personnel lived in military facilities and wore military uniforms. Intelligence officers worked in obvious government buildings. The distinction between civilian and military populations was clear and obvious. Earth was different. Military expertise was hidden throughout the civilian population. Former soldiers ran grocery stores, taught school, and drove taxicabs. Former intelligence officers worked as librarians, nurses, and shop owners. When the invasion began, these people had activated networks and procedures they had spent decades developing. They had used skills learned in military service to conduct operations that were invisible to an enemy who did not understand how human society actually worked. "Your intelligence assessments were completely wrong," Susan explained. "You identified our obvious military facilities and destroyed them, but you missed the real military strength because it was hidden in plain sight." The final blow came when Susan showed Vexthul the true extent of the Resistance network. She produced maps, photographs, and documents that revealed operations in every major city on the continent. The grocery store where he had bought food was a logistics center. The hospital where his wounded had been treated was an intelligence gathering facility. The school near his headquarters was a training camp. The airport where his supplies arrived was controlled by former military pilots. "We have been watching you since the day you arrived," Susan said. "We know your troop strengths, your weapon capabilities, your supply schedules, and your tactical procedures. We have been inside your command centers and your communication networks. We have been reading your reports and listening to your conversations. Vexithul realized that the occupation had been doomed from the beginning. The aliens had been fighting an enemy they could not see because that enemy had spent decades learning to be invisible. When Susan finally released him, Commander Vexithul faced a choice. He could continue the occupation and watch his forces be slowly destroyed by an enemy they could never defeat. Or he could admit the truth to his superiors and face the consequences of total failure. The evacuation order came 2 weeks later. The withdrawal of Korthak forces was a disaster. Every convoy was harassed by attacks that seemed to come from the civilian population itself. Supply trucks were destroyed by mechanics who understood their vehicles. Transport ships were sabotaged by ground crews who had served them faithfully for months. Communication systems failed because the technicians who maintained them were former signal intelligence specialists. The humans did not just drive out the invaders. They made sure the aliens understood exactly why they had lost. As the last Korthak transport lifted off from Earth, Commander Vexthul transmitted his final report to the Empire's High Command. It was a warning that would change galactic military doctrine forever. The humans do not separate their military from their civilian population, he reported. Their soldiers do not stop being soldiers when they remove their uniforms. They become something far more dangerous, soldiers who look like everyone else. The report continued. Their deadliest warriors are indistinguishable from ordinary citizens because they have trained to be indistinguishable. They work civilian jobs, live civilian lives, and raise civilian families, but they remain ready for war at all times. We searched for military installations and found grocery stores. We looked for command centers and found schools. We sought weapons depots and found auto repair shops. The enemy was everywhere because the enemy was everyone. The final paragraph of the report would be studied in military academies across the galaxy. Do not invade Earth. Their entire population is a potential military threat. Their veterans blend into civilian society so completely that distinguishing between combatants and non-combatants is impossible. They have created a form of warfare that makes occupation untenable and conquest meaningless. The Korthak Empire had conquered 17 star systems. Earth was supposed to be number 18. Instead, it became the first world to defeat them completely. The victory belonged to people like Jake Morrison, who had served pancakes and gathered intelligence, like Linda Carter, who had poured coffee and learned enemy languages, like Bob Kelly, who had fixed alien vehicles while studying their weaknesses. The heroes of Earth's liberation were not obvious warriors in shining armor. They were ordinary people who had extraordinary training. They were veterans who had learned the most important lesson of modern warfare. The best soldiers are the ones the enemy never sees coming. The occupation of Earth lasted exactly 6 months and 12 days. The lessons learned from that failure would influence military thinking throughout the galaxy for generations. Humanity had proven that the most dangerous enemy is not the one who appears most threatening. The most dangerous enemy is the one who appears completely harmless while planning your destruction. The Empire had discovered why Earth's deadliest soldiers blend in as civilians. It was not because they were hiding from war. It was because they were the war itself disguised as peace, and that made them unstoppable.